Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, just when I think I've covered just about every topic you could possibly imagine on this podcast as we race toward 2,000 interviews, I still learn something new every single day. And recently, I came across the phrase silent data issues. I found myself scratching my head. What's that all about? What does it mean in this age where businesses are all increasingly looking at making data-driven decisions? What are silent data issues? And at that point, I'm armed with a curious mind. I went down the rabbit hole and I found myself Googling for more information. And I came across a company called SODA, which scans for issues caused by human error, firmware upgrades, schema changes, cross-platform integration, and all transformation bugs and that long list of things that can go wrong. And I quickly learned that SODA data are actually on a mission to automate, verify and validate the flow of data from a range of sources and encourage collaboration between software data engineers and downstream business decision makers. But when I finally learned, just the cherry on the cake there was that they were given the label of cool vendor by Gartner. I mean, that was enough for me to get them on the podcast today, and hopefully both me and everyone listening all over the world can learn a thing or two about silent data issues and much more. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Belgium, where Maarten is waiting from SODA Data to share the story behind the company, discuss silent data issues, and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Maarten. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. First of all, thanks for having me. So I'm Maarten, co-founder and CEO of SODA Data. So we're a data observability software company. If you want to learn more immediately, just go check out soda.io. At the company, I'm actively involved in kind of the product and go-to-market, that together with a team of 30, almost 35. So this basically means I'm setting and communicating strategy, looking to like hiring the team and then growing the team. Also getting my hands dirty every now and then in these areas around go-to-market or product. And next to my day-to-day really responsibilities at the company, I'm also a hobby cook, a classic car enthusiast, and an occasional gamer.
There is so much to unpack there, and I love the fusion between the high-tech aspect of your life and data and video games, combined with the love of classic cars. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, I have this thing when objects from the past that are very nicely designed that I can look and spend so much time with that. I have one of the cars, well, actually, it's the only one right now, but I really, really, really love it, is a Fiat Spider from 69. So really, really old car. Yeah. But it's an amazing design and it's fantastic to drive around with. I spent some of my time just browsing through websites, reading more about them, building up my list of what eventually I'd love to drive, things like that.
Oh, I love that. And if I were to take you back before SODA Data, what's your origin story? Where did your passion for technology come from? What lit that spark within you and ultimately, eventually put you on this path you're on today?
Right. Well, my passion for tech started long time ago. I actually grew up in a very rural area. And one part of my family were farmers, and the other one operated more kind of industrial. They were operating a flax company. So flax linen, you might know from, of course, the towels you might use in your kitchen because flax is great for that, but also from the dollar notes. The US dollar has flax in there. So it's a very widely applicable product ultimately. And because of that company that was in the family, I was very lucky to get my hands on computers very early. So I was quickly starting to spend a lot more time inside in front of the computer rather than outside, helping, for example, my dad out. And then when I was 8, I think that was another kind of major step. There was this company just a few kilometers away from where I grew up, and they were in speech recognition. And they got listed on the NASDAQ. And that was like for my region, like tech companies were something from America, right? Far, far away. It was somewhat mythical even. And then all of a sudden we had one just around the corner. And, this, so as they went public, I started following that company very closely. They did a yearly visit, got introduced to the technology. Unfortunately, their story was not a very long and successful one because they were bankrupt a few years later. It was around just slightly before the .com. But at least one thing became clear, like I wanted to be in software and tech. The space was super exciting. What they were doing was incredible. So that was like a bit the earlier years. But if you then fast forward, maybe 15 years forward, so I complete my studies in computer science and business, and I kind of start looking for, okay, what's next? So I need to find a software company, and that I can kind of join to start learning kind of how that all works, because at school, you don't really get to know all of that. And I had a pretty local mindset. So I started looking for startups in Belgium. And I got quite lucky, I have to say. I found this company called Colibra. And although I didn't know what they were doing, really, I didn't understand their product. It was semantic data integration. It's like, what is this? But I had a very good click with their founders. They were amazing people. And I was like, the product, they'll figure it out, or I'll figure it out. But I want to work with these guys. And so, I joined Colibra as employee number 5, helped grow to 250 employees and a bit over, I think about 25 million in revenue. And today, so I stayed there for 6 years, and now 4 years later, they're about 1,000 people, and they're valued over 5 billion. So they're a big success story. I learned a lot about data management there. That's kind of a space that we're also active in an adjacent area. For monitoring and observability, while they're focused a little bit more on kind of discovery of data, search, a bit like the Google search for your data sets. We go into the health of data with and testing, for example, of data. So that's kind of how I got into this. And ultimately, past my, I think, 6 years at Colibra, I spoke with the founders. Hey, guys, remember when I was doing my interview back in the days? I always said I would love to start it myself, a company. I think now is a good time. And we still are good friends. And we're all going in our own direction right now.
What a great story. And like you said, that path led you to Soda, which is, for people hearing about you for the first time, is a forerunner in data quality monitoring and testing. But can you tell the listeners a little bit more about the kind of problems that you're solving with your tech?
Right. Yes. So let's maybe kind of unpack that a little bit first. So I think we should kind of talk a bit about testing first. Mm-hmm. And then let's talk about like data, and then let's bring them together. So testing, I think for everyone that's involved or a bit of aware of how we build reliable products, software products, like apps or, websites that we could do all sorts of things on. To make sure that these are reliable as we're continuously introducing change, is that we do a variety of tests ultimately. And tests do make sure that your code is working as expected, right? So there's many different types, and that has evolved over the last decades, like regression tests, integration tests. There's so many examples. And that is kind of an integral part of software engineering best practice. Now, if we think about data, well, organizations are becoming more reliant on data. Right, so I think that's everyone sees that around them. So we're making decisions based on data at a faster rate. It's also increasingly without any humans involved. That's a bit scary sometimes. And what's really unique about data is also that continuous change. For example, let's say we're talking about a data set of transactions that we do on our e-commerce platform. Well, those transactions happen every second. So that means that every second new records are being introduced into that transaction table. So with that, we can bring these two together. So what's data testing? Well, you kind of could have guessed it. It's applying that principle of testing on the data itself. And there's kind of a variety of problems that we solve for. But ultimately, what we don't want is we don't want data to not be usable or be inaccurate or unavailable, or if you take the analogy with applications or infrastructure, that they're down. We don't want that, right? And businesses don't want that because they need to be able to decide in the moment. So that's a bit what we're solving for. And I'm happy to also, I don't know, like I'll bring it back to you. Happy to give some like types of problems that could happen, if that will be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've got anything that would just bring that to life, so maybe a business leader can understand how it would work in their world.
So maybe I'll first unpack it in like 3 examples that are more technically oriented, and then we can kind of go into the business case or the examples after that as well. So maybe a first one is that changes around like how we capture data. And let me kind of elaborate a little bit. For example, and I'll maybe use a use case here that we're actively solving at one of our customers. So let's say you have a company and they sell carbon footprint data. So they sell carbon footprint information about other companies and their products, for example. And they sell that data to investors or investment management firms. So why would they do that? Well, because investors, of course, people nowadays, they want to invest in green financial products, right? So if there is a high carbon or water waste or what have you, you don't really want to invest. You want to invest in kind of a company that puts that much more front and center. So, but you can imagine that that company that kind of collects and sells that data, like there's a lot of changes every day. For example, there's new regulations introduced. And these changes affect how they can collect data across all of these different countries. And there's a lot of changes that happen that, for example, we found a new way of collecting this. And all of a sudden, all the numbers are different. And we have a lot more information for a certain country, for example. And these changes, they're not practically communicated to the people using that data. And that is one type of issue or problem that we help solve for. Right? It's kind of a changes on the producer side of data. Then there's a second type that is more like structural changes. In data, we have a lot of handovers. For example, this point between the producers and external firm, and we're handing it over to the company that buys it. Well, at that handover point, you can have potential mistakes. That kind of happens everywhere in business in general. And what happens sometimes is that all of a sudden there's kind of the structure changes. So there's new data points available. There's some that are not available. Maybe the data type changed. And all of these can lead into, for example, data not being kind of flowing downstream, becoming ready for analysis. They get stuck somewhere upstream because something fundamental has changed. And very often that doesn't really result in any alerting. So people don't know about that. And data becomes stale or not fresh, really. So that's the second type. And the third type is semantic changes. It is change in definition. That is very often the case in business as well. That, for example, you're talking about revenue, but at some point, one business leader excludes certain regions, for example, for good reasons. Maybe we're planning on disinvesting in those areas or what have you not. But the semantic changes can also lead to a lot of problems. So, these are just 3 examples. They are a bit technical in nature, but they happen every day at companies, really.
Oh, I love that. And when I was doing a bit of research on you guys, I was also reading about the big idea here is to actually eliminate so-called silent data issues. So can you just introduce the listeners to exactly what that means?
Yeah, sure. So it's a silent issue. So you're not aware of it. It's basically a ticking time bomb. these data issues they're a very unfortunate fact of life in business. Like there's no way around them in general. However, we can really reduce them significantly. But we like to use the example of a silent issue because I think many that have worked with data could kind of find an example that they've personally have been involved in which the problem with the data became only kind of apparent or visible right when you actually needed the data the most. And that is kind of a very common theme when it comes to quality management. So you don't know about them until you, for example, look at the dashboard and see that, the numbers don't add up or you don't trust them. Or for a data science example, when you review the accuracy of your ML model, you're like, why is this not accurate anymore? What has changed? And then you see, one of my input features, the data was stale. So only at those times, it's quite late and it's very reactive. So what we help teams with is that the ones that are building and automating with data, that they are the first to know when changes or problems happen, so that they can proactively communicate that to all of their users internally. And nowadays, it's often the other way around. It's the users that start raising questions, say, hey, this is broken, this report is broken, can you help out? And each time that happens, there's some trust that kind of goes away. And trust is very, very, very hard to build up, but it's also very quick to go away, especially when these problems, which the root cause could sometimes be very futile or very simple. But then again, for the end user, it means a lot because in that moment, they cannot be their best selves. They cannot use data to make decisions.
And I'm glad you said that because it does feel like companies all over the world are moving towards completely data-driven decision-making now, and ensuring data is of the optimum quality is critical. So I'm curious, what kind of trends are you noticing from the conversations that you're having with your customers? Is there anything that stands out?
If I look even back over the last 10 years in data, there's a couple of times that we've really structurally thought about how to organize for actually becoming fully data driven. And I think that moment is happening now as well. I think in the past, people that have worked with kind of, let's say 5+ years ago, data warehousing type of setups, they will know that it was sometimes quite tedious. Like there's a lot of business logic, there's a lot of things to replicate into the warehouse, and then you very often create bottlenecks. And bottlenecks just, they block the organization from transforming. And a couple of times we've really structurally thought about like how to deal with this, and now is another time. And I think the key word there, or the key kind of label or name, is data mesh. So data mesh is a trend from the last, I think, about 1.5 to 2 years, something like that. Maybe like the concepts already originated 3-4 years ago, but it's almost like it's not almost. It is a socio-technical framework. The person who's behind this is Zamak Degani. She's at ThoughtWorks. So you might know ThoughtWorks from Martin Fowler and others. And she's basically, what she's doing is, I think, something very, very interesting that many companies can benefit from. It is thinking about, what principles do we bring into the data space and how do we organize, making sure we can comply with regulation, but as well as optimize for speed and agility. So that is, I think, I'm happy to unpack that a bit more if you're interested, kind of what it means. But to me, like that is one of the most interesting type of trends or changes that we're seeing in the last years, and where quality, by the way, has a very important angle, right? Quality is front and center in that data mesh principle. I think it's personally a very, very exciting time in data, and a lot of things happening, to be honest.
I love that. Well, I'd have to get you back on next year. I think that might be something that we can expand on in a lot more detail. And when I was researching, another thing that I came across was that Soda was actually listed as a data management cool vendor by Gartner last month. I mean, it sounds incredible. Can you expand on that, or what it meant to you and your team?
Yeah, Gartner said we're cool, and that made us very happy. It's Gartner is a special place for me. Like, they've been around for a long time, and they have very in-depth background and knowledge, as well as into kind of what data and data management is all about. So they've been an analyst in this space for over a decade, probably close to two, if not more. I should actually do my research. But I think so for us. It was very nice because when we had conversation with the analysts and we're talking about how we think this future looks like, they were right there. We were all of a sudden, we stopped looking at product for a while. We started getting into a vivid discussion, and I think that's nice because they are intimately familiar with the problem space. So for us, it kind of it meant a lot of validation from that side. It meant a lot to us. So yeah, the team definitely we celebrated it. It's also kind of a validation that the category, which was previously called data quality management, is kind of evolving. And Gartner is also evolving their thinking in terms of what is part of that category and what not. So yeah, we were super happy with that.
Brilliant. And where do you go from here, though? I mean, you've been called a cool vendor by Gartner. It doesn't get any better than that. So where do you go from there, and what's going to be your focus in 2022?
I think 2022 for us is really about one of our key mottos that we've already set years ago. Data quality and data, they're a team sport. So this is something we do together. And it's a myth to think that one individual can solve data quality problems at a company. We can definitely help kind of drive that change. So be a change agent. However, doing it on your own is not possible. So you have to enable everyone in the company to get involved, and you have to make it visible what they are doing. Because today, many people who actually help improve quality and act as a good citizen in the company, their work is non-visible. You don't know about it, but they're actually doing super important work. So for us, it is about both the technical and the non-technical user. Whereas 2022 for us is going to bring an increased focus on the non-technical user, making sure that those non-technical are people that very often know the business very well, that know what is important to the business and what not. So bringing them into the equation is absolutely critical. So that's for us a key thing, a key theme that will be continue to work on, making sure we can promise or deliver on that vision of data quality as a team sport.
Excellent. And we started the podcast today talking about your origin story and the journey that you've been on. I'm now going to have a bit of fun with you and ask you, what has been the soundtrack to your journey in tech? Is there a song or piece of music that has accompanied you throughout your career or just helps you get your head in the zone? Now, you are in Belgium. I remember back in the day, I was a big Hooverphonic fan. I'm not sure if there's still a thing in Belgium.
Oh, yes.
But what would your song be and why?
I think that's an incredibly hard one. Because I listen to so many different types of music, and I might pick one that is not so closely related with my journey in tech, but just in general. And it's from the Beastie Boys. So it's East Coast hip hop from the 90s. The song is called Intergalactic.
Oh yes.
And for some reason, this song as I've listened to this ever since it came out, I know the lyrics by heart, all of them, and I just simply love it. It makes you really think, much bigger, much beyond. For example, much more beyond the borders of Belgium.
Oh man, absolutely love that. I've got that playing on repeat inside my head already now, so I can actually hook in there. But I'm resisting the urge not to sing along, especially the robotic voice bit. But before I let you go, for anyone listening wanting to find out more information about Soda, there were that many different domain names out there. What's the best way of finding you guys and contacting your team?
Right. So the website is soda.io. So that's quite simple and easy to remember. And on there's a variety of ways. You can go traditional channels like email, but or LinkedIn, of course. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. I think the most fun one is our Slack community. So there you could just join. It's a public Slack. The entire team is there, but also a whole bunch of users are there, and that's where people are discussing these problems as well as finding solutions.
So much I've loved about our conversation today. Yes, about that big idea to eliminate so-called silent data issues. One thing that we didn't talk about there, though, was that these are the issues that bubble up. And I think that was the reason behind the name Soda as well.
Yes.
Further downstream, having gone undetected in datasets. So great to get you back on next year. I think we've got unfinished business on a few areas that we could dig a little bit deeper on. But more than anything, just thanks for joining me today and sharing your story.
Awesome, Neil. Thanks for having me.
So the big idea here is to eliminate so-called silent data issues. And these are something that we all see further downstream when they go undetected in datasets. And think about online recommendation engines using incorrect data to push the wrong products. Or the government here in the UK sending out letters to people already deceased. Or cars being built using data that has been corrupted somehow. In an era where most companies are moving towards being completely data-driven, ensuring data is of the optimum quality is critical. And every single person listening to this podcast knows what happens when it isn't. Garbage in, garbage out. And nobody wants to go down that road. So a huge thank you to Maarten for taking the time to come on here, share his story, talk about silent data issues, which was a first for me, and hopefully you've learned something along the way too. And not only that, he finished with an absolute banger of a track with that Beastie Boys tune there. But rather than burst into song, and let me tell you, I do suffer with a form of musical Tourette's, whereas when somebody gives me a song title or says the odd word of a song, I just randomly burst into song. So I'm going to rein myself in quickly. If you've got any questions for me or the guest, or you want to come on the podcast, or anything at all, email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. You can get me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram at Neil C. Hughes. Send over your messages. Don't just connect with me either. Send me a quick message with that connection or follow, and I'll get straight back to you. Other than that, I'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Already got another guest lined up for you. So a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.